Are you ready?
We have enough people.
Everyone is here.
Okay.
Yep, we have all everyone's here.
Okay, it's 6 o'clock, and I'm going to call the special meeting of the Comfort Lake, Forest Lake Watershed District to order. And first we'll start with a roll call.
Right, Manager Loaf,
Here?
Manager Schmaltz,
Here.
Manager Baki,
Here.
Manager Taves,
I'm here.
President Anderson.
Here. All right, let's get started. The first item is the strategic plan. Emily, do you have that?
Yeah,
Okay.
President Anderson managers, I can show the edited strategic plan, which I emailed out to the board on Friday. We've got the two versions, as Manager Schmaltz had talked about last Thursday. There's the full version and then the sort of abridged. So again, you've got kind of the first few pages, the bolded there, the mission, vision and values, and then the portrait orientation of the top initiatives and simplifying those tables so it doesn't keep repeating that category. It's just once at the top there. So I've got these all here like this, and then here's where the abridged version will stop. And then here's the additional detail for some of these in these other pages. Those are still the landscape orientation.
Fire board, let's discuss this. Is this as you envisioned it? I'll open it up to anybody. This is a workshop. so we
Again,
don't have to be
I think,
informed.
I like the fact that we can get this, at least without the detail, all the detailed actions behind it. We can get the thing on 3 sheets of paper, front and back, and I think that's gonna be a real advantage to lake associations and to city council, et cetera.
Is this 3 pages front and back?
Yes.
It
The
is. so-
abridged one would be, so yeah, it's 6 pages long total. If you print it double-sided,
Okay.
it'd be 3.
And it looks nice, it's compact, you can read it,
Mhm.
not intimidating.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think one of the best things, for me is that we've got the new building or office space laid out. And so it's an introduction to the public of this topic.
That's very true.
Yes, so I think it's good. I think the same information, but just front and backing to make it 6 pages is good. So it looked fine to me. I just wanted to make sure it was as everyone on the board expected it to be before you okay it. Okay, Manager Teets, let's just go round robin here. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought it took some of the redundancy out of it and kind of simplified it. For me, it flows more easily to between the eye and the brain. So I think that's a win.
Yeah, good. Manager Baki?
Yes, I think it looks very professional. I think it captures all the essence of what we discussed as part of our strategic planning. And yeah, I give it a thumbs up.
Okay, good. Manager Tate, Loaf.
I have no concerns with it. I think it looks great. I think it's concise and pretty easy to digest. So I think that's important. It's pleasing to the eye. So
Good.
it's not too intense, I guess. So it's readable and understandable, I think. So
Yeah. Wonderful. This will be an easy motion for someone to make.
Would the board
I'll-
like to approve the plan and then direct staff to distribute it, or do you want to wait until we've got the cover letter before distribution?
Let's have a motion first and we'll put that as part of the discussion. Is there a motion to accept the strategic plan as revised?
I'll move that to accept the strategic plan as revised and as presented this evening.
Okay, is there a second?
I will second that.
Thank you, Manager Taves. Roll call please. Oh, wait, discussion. I'm sorry, discussion. Now let's talk about the release of this. Let me give you my understanding of what our discussion was. And that was to have this approved so that we can get it out to everyone. And then following up with the letter that was talked about, that's going to go to our partners, our community partners. And that has to be more organized so that we can reach out for dates. As I understand it, we wanted to have a plan on when we were going to meet with our community partners. So that's not gonna happen for a couple of weeks, is my understanding. But we wanted to get this out to the public. So we're gonna put it on social media. We don't do mailings. We had that discussion about.
Yep, there you go. Perfect.
We're okay now?
Yep.
Okay. So we wanted to get this out to the public. And that means through social media, all the venues that are related to that, and distributed. And then there's more background coordination that has to take place with each of our community partners. And that's when the letter will go out to them with a personal letter and a personal copy of the initiatives. The strategic plan, I mean, excuse me. Okay, is that what other people I hope understood too?
Fine.
All right, very good.
All right, so we'll post
right.
it online and on social media, but not emailing it out to anyone until you do the letter.
Well, not to the community partners, not to them, but it can go out to the general public through social media.
Okay.
And
No, but not the technical advisory committee, like the government staffs and city administrators and everyone. We'll hold off on all of that.
well, I think it's best to hold off on the the government folks, including their administrators, because we want it to be introduced to them via a personal reach out so that we can talk about putting together the meeting that's going to take place, the government watershed meetings, and work that out first. And then we'll send them a personal letter and a personal copy of the strategic plan. And that will be by mail.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense?
We'll get it posted online and on social media, but we will wait for you to initiate the letter and everything before we do anything else.
Well, and for staff to get the coordination together with each of our communities so that we can establish a meeting date with them. And then the letter, the formal letter and the personal copy goes out to them. Okay,
Okay, I'll work on setting up those meetings before you're done with the letter.
correct.
Okay,
That's what I wanted to do, so. That was my understanding. You can go back and listen to the last meeting's tape, but I'm pretty clear on that he wanted to get all of that set up first. Okay.
Okay.
So, any other comments or questions before we vote? Okay, hearing none, let's do a roll call.
Manager Lowe,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz.
Aye.
Manager Baki,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
President Anderson.
Aye. Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And now, it's going to be your show from here on in, Emily.
sure. President Anderson, managers, we've sent the budget workbook out. Managers have had some time for review. Included in that initial distribution was that 2026 project planning summary. And then I typed up a memo with some additional information on the projects, which we posted in the June 12th board packet. Coordinated that with Dr. Wilkinson at EOR. So that's kind of an update on the projects. And, you know, I think we had talked about at the last workshop, if managers wanted to go through the budget, make sure you've got all the things that you wanted to see in there, your personal items that you wanted to see in the budget. And we could start there, or I'd be happy to kind of just walk through the budget in greater detail and we can highlight some items that, you know, maybe there's a pending grant or maybe there's a potential to do a cut if we wanted to discuss it. And we could just go in order from there, or managers can bring up their own items if they would like.
I have a question. Did you put into tonight's review, the projects that we expect to do in 2026?
So the budget that went out includes the projects that we expect to do that we have the grants secured for. If you would like, I could display a budget that has the uncertain grants in it, that has those expenses and revenues. And we could go through that with the uncertain grants.
Yeah, I think that's the point that I was trying to get at, is what is our work plan for 2026? And if we're going to be working on any part of those projects, we should have them listed for the budget. So that we know what we're working on and we know exactly what type of revenue we need to generate through grants or some other source to accomplish that entire budget outline.
Okay.
It
if you
makes
wanna
it so
start
much
with-
easier, we're working from, let me make another comment here. And the reason behind that, we're working with a deficit right now. It's up almost $2 million. And we are limited in the stream of revenue that we can tap into. We have a budget that has to be levied. We have to keep an open mind about what we can do to accomplish what we need to do. Maintain our overhead and our staff and so forth. With that, and the other two sources for us are grants. Or I'm gonna count the loans through the MPCA. It's the only avenue that we can do. I asked you for some details on that, so you can share that with the board tonight. And then we've got the $2 million that we can go through our local bank. So, it's pretty limited. So we have to know what we're dealing with. We have to know the likelihood of getting the grants and so forth, and what's available. The timelines and all of that good stuff. So I'm sure we can get there, but we just have to know all of those inputs up front. Okay,
President Anderson, may I just ask a question?
sure.
You stated that we have nearly a $2 million deficit. At our last budget meeting, it was 1 million. Has that changed?
Well, it's 1.9, I think is what the audit says. Might be 1.2, but I think it's 1.9 is the net revenue, net position at the end of the year.
So that is a change from our last budget meeting.
Well, I don't know, is it? What was the number that,
It is, because we clarified it was a $1 million shortfall at the
Yeah.
last budget
If
meeting.
you go to page 7, it shows 993,000. So, I mean, unless something's wrong with that calculation, I think that's the number we have to try to address.
and
That's correct, isn't it, Emily?
The 2024 audit, the year-end fund balance was 1.4 million. So kind of carrying that through, the 2025 expense budget, estimated year end, we estimate that the fund balance would be down to 1 million at the end of 2025. Bring that over, and then with this current budget, we would end 2026 with a fund balance of about 40,000.
so we're not gonna have enough for the first 6 months of 2027.
Yeah.
If that's our balance, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so what I look at is the big number really is important is the net position at the end of the year from the audit. And we were, you'd have to look up that number. If it's not 1.9, my recollection is that it was close to 2 million. So we want to take care of this in pieces. We can certainly break it up. That was another topic I wanted to touch on this evening, is that we don't have to make it up all at one time, but we have to have enough over, let's say, 2 years or 3 years at the most. To make sure that we have a reserve balance at the end of the year to cover 6 months of operational experience, of expenditures. And that's gonna be somewhere around $600,000. So the 1.2, I don't even know if 1.2 is enough anymore for 6 months of our operational overhead. I include programs in that. Because the programs are those ongoing things that we do that typically don't get funded by any type of outside grants. We can use the money from the MPCA loans for that, but we can't use it for specific projects. Capital projects. I suppose we could if we wanted to, because it's pretty open, but typically we don't want to do that because we have to reserve that for other things that don't have specific grants designed for that type of activity. Okay, so let's not waste a lot of time on this. I just wanted to make sure the board understands where I come from when I'm looking at our financial position. And we don't want to stay in the hole like we have been for the last few years, so. I'm looking at the 1.9 that we need to, in my opinion, cover over at least the next 2 years would be ideal. So we can break that up, so let's start with 1.2. Is that what you said, Manager Baki, 1.2?
No, I didn't say 1.2. I just was under the impression we were at a $1 million deficit for 2026. But now that you explain, we're really budgeting into 2027 to make sure we have a fund balance. I understand what you're saying, so I'm not sure where we are. It's more than $1 million then, right?
Yeah, it is, because again, we have to have what we call our reserve fund. Has to be big enough to cover 6 months of the next year. Because we don't get our levy funds, the first levy fund doesn't hit us until the first part of July.
Yes, that clarifies that. Thank you.
Okay,
We're kind of talking about this number down here. The deficit is 993,000. What we're trying to get this number is to 1.2 or 1.9 million. Right now it's 40,000. So we would need to not only have a balanced budget and have this figure be 0, we would need to have revenues exceed expenditures by at least 200,000 to bring the fund balance from 1 million to 1.2 million. Is that what you're talking about, Jackie?
a fund balance January 1st of 2026.
Of 2027, that would be this number down here. Getting this to 1.2 million would mean we need to change this number up here. Instead of negative 993,000, it would need to be positive 200,000.
Well, yeah, but you have to add the money to get it to 0. All right, and then if you want more positive, then you've got to budget for that too. All right, so we're looking at, what is that number, 593? I can't read it from here, but 593, is that right?
993.
Oh, 993, yes. Okay,
So really, if you go to page 7, our leftovers about 40,000, and that has to be half of what we need for the next 6 months, which would be another 650,000. So if you look at that, you have page 7 up there, Emily?
Yeah, sorry, I just need to cross-reference. I don't have page numbers on the spreadsheet, but I've got the PDF open, so I'm cross-referencing. This is page 7, right?
So we end up the year we'll end up this year, if we don't do anything, is with 39,000 left as a carryover, and that's not big enough. It has to be at least 650,000, if not more. So that's kind of the number you have to think of at this point in time.
How much do we need to have to cover operations from January to the beginning of the
650,000.
650?
Yeah, staff time and that kind of stuff.
Well, you have to include go up to the administrative area of the budget, the expenses. It says expenses up, here. Yeah, there you go. Or just, it doesn't have to be this kind of detail. Go to that first page that you had. Yeah, right there. Just
Okay.
yeah, right there. So it's read that section right there. Loan repayment, staff wages and benefits, administrative overhead. Go ahead and read out. I can't read all of that from here. Can you read it?
Yeah, yep, you got the first three, and then permit, engineering and legal review, project O&M. And then I had these other, grouped them into other categories. And just tried to put into these kind of different terms, like lumping them together into these sort of core critical things that like have to be budgeted for. And the rest could be dependent on grants, because the grant revenue is hard to say.
Other ongoing programs? What programs are covered by grants that we have right now?
Well, we get a small amount of grants for aquatic invasive species management.
Mhm.
And really the main, the shoreline program is a
Yeah.
really good place
Yeah,
we can get grants for.
That's kind of minimal money, you know, when we're talking about the budget overall. So I would include everything that's in that expense category for operational expenses.
Yeah,
So
I
what
can
is
do
it?
that, and that'll just kind of make these numbers even more negative if we wanted to put, like, carry this forward.
Mhm.
3% for kind of an inflation, maybe. Yeah, if we wanted to be budgeting for those ongoing programs, assuming we're not getting grants for them, then yeah, we're looking at deficits closer
Well, the
to a
grant, if
million.
we get grants for those programs, we should go after grants all the time. But we're only talking at about roughly $60,000, maybe 70 for the items under under that expense category.
Mhm.
We want to keep our programs going. AIS is a program. We want to keep that going. We want to keep, obviously, our water quality program going. So, and we want all the employees to be there. And so I think we're capturing everything by using that. The land acquisition and management, that's really sort of just a management amount. It's not actually making down payments and going after we're trying to close a deal with that. We would always have to get some money from another outside source. So to do those, so that's overhead, to keep that program going. So what's our total for that area expenses?
For the areas we just talked about, including an estimate, these are just, 2027 and beyond. They're just kind of rough projections. That would be a budget of 3 million in 2027, just for kind of those ongoing things.
And what was it in 2024?
In 2024, it was 2.1 million.
2.1,
Well,
almost 2.2.
If you add projects and land acquisition, it's 2.7, but without those,
Okay.
it's
Well,
2.1.
but again, we're only talking about overhead here. So to keep those programs going, so that total is 2.7. From 2004, or 24, that's an actual number. And then our expected in 2025 is what? The same or over?
Oh, it becomes 2.7 for just those items in 2025. And that excludes these big numbers under projects and land acquisition.
Okay, so roughly 2.5, 2.7 is what we're looking at for overtime. Correct?
Yep.
Okay. So we want to budget at least that much for 2026, unless we're going to be going after more aggressive green space and land, for those initiatives.
Yeah, and I can talk about some of the grant seeking that we are doing in order to pay for those sorts of initiatives, if you'd like to go into that project's
Well, I
topic
just wanted to
or.
make a comment, because I think we're being a little bit too aggressive in our estimates because, and what we should do is go back and look at what we've actually survived with each year, but we started this year with $1 million. And we got through the first 6 months without batting an eye. So basically, I don't think we'll need, that's not gonna jump to,
Of that $1 million though, most of it was dedicated to specific projects. So we were borrowing from that fund when we shouldn't have been. Those are dedicated funds, so we shouldn't be doing that. The rules are very clear on that.
nobody's bothered us up to this point in time. So it's up to the board to decide how they wanna run their operation. So, yeah, it may be a little risky, but I think, I'll tell you right now, you're not gonna raise 2.7 million for next year. You're not gonna raise the levy that much. You're gonna double the levy? I mean, 150% of the levy?
You'd
increase?
have to, but that's why I said there are other revenue streams. We've
Right.
got 3 revenue.
So I
streams.
think what we should do is go back and let's put a number in there, anywhere from 1 million to 2.7 is fine, I think, okay, so that's. a good
That's my point,
Right.
is that we spent,
So, but what we should be looking at is going back and looking at what costs are we gonna take out of the operation? And with all of our projects for next year are already in the budget that we have grants for,
Mhm.
so. So what the budget is what it is. Now, if we add more projects and get more grants, it may go up on us. But right now, this is our best estimate as far as I understand of what projects we're gonna be running next year that are funded by grants. And we've got a number of other projects coming along, waiting for grants to be won. And if they come along, then they'll probably move into the budget
but it's our
also.
plan for the next year. It's all of those things we're going to be working on. We're going to be spending overhead to accomplish those projects. So we need to identify for ourselves and the public, what exactly are we going to be spending our time on next year? You can't hide that anywhere. You can't just bring it up when we get the grant dollars.
It's in
We're
the
gonna
budget,
say.
it's in the budget. We've got the overhead, we've got the salaries, we've got the loans. I mean, we've got the grants.
But we're still gonna be working on other things that are not listed there. You just said it. The projects that are not, we don't.
We've
have
done that
money
every
to
year
fix.
in the past. so-
Not every year in the past. This is where things get tripped up. When you don't have an exact plan for what you're going to be spending your money on and your time on in the coming year.
Okay, well, let's go through what you wanna go
Well,
through.
let's go
That's
through.
Fine.
Okay. So I can show a version of the budget. So right now, we've been looking at the one that went out. I created another one. This hasn't gone out, but it's largely the same, but I'm highlighting a few items. And I'll just kind of go through some of the project areas. It's projects in land acquisition and a little bit in programs too. And just talk about the grants that we have applied for or we're planning, but they're not confirmed yet. And so in the original budget, they were marked as a TBD, and then they were reflected on that earned grant revenue tab and also on the grant and other revenue inventory that we've applied for it, but it's just not certain yet. So they're kind of showing up in the budget as earmarked for, we have applied for these and we're planning for them. But the expenses aren't showing up in the numbers themselves. They're a TBD in that other one. And so I can go through this that shows the actual numbers themselves. I want to say most of the grants that we're going for, they're really big grants. We just applied for almost 5 million between 2 grants from the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Fund. However, those Lessard Sam's grants, those aren't going to pay for, the overhead and everything. It's kind of a net zero because you get those revenues, yes, but then you have to do the expenses. So it doesn't really help the district's position as far as that negative 993,000, because for every dollar of revenue, you have to add that really specified expense to it. There's a couple of instances where there are grants that we could use to cover the match portion. And and I'll talk about that one right now. So I want to zoom in a little bit here on the lake section. So our existing budget had, so ongoing projects is the school lake agricultural BMPs and feedlot. So that's a multi-year project, a little bit in 24, a lot in 25, and then the majority probably completing in 2026. And that is mostly covered by a Clean Water Fund grant. And we had 5,000 of local match that we had budgeted for here. If we get our federal Section 319 Small Watershed Focus Grant, we could use that to cover the match. And so that helps the position. That's $5,000 worth of levy funds that the levy needed to cover. Then now we're going to get another grant to cover. So that's an instance where it's kind of helping the position. Same and more significantly for the Little Comfort Lake at Heath Iron Enhanced Sand Filter Project. That's a $1.6 million project. The majority of it is covered by the Clean Water Fund grant, but 10% match of a $1.6 million project is still a pretty significant sum. And the staff expenses are covering a good bit of that, but there are still some construction and engineering costs that the district would have to bear because the grant doesn't cover it. And so if we got that Section 319 grant, that could cover that match. And so that would be $67,000 that we're taking out of local spend and going into grant spend and taking in those grant revenues. Now, regarding that grant, it's not news to anyone that the certainty of federal grants is very uncertain right now. I had previously thought that our Section 319 program was secure. The whole purpose of the Section 319 program, the Small Watersheds Focus, is to provide stable funding for water quality improvements. And so it's this cycle where every 4 years you get another installment. We are due for our next installment next fall. So we could have those funds in hand to cover these things by fall of 2026. However, MPCA and EPA are uncertain if we'll get anything at all at this point. So I don't think we can count on those. They would really help us and we would use them up very quickly. But they might not come through just because of the uncertainty at the federal level. I'll just pause there before going on.
This is great work, and I think, so you had just picked up, if we can do that, you just picked up $71,000 that we would have available to help us carry over. So as you identify these opportunities, we should make sure we get them on a sheet of paper and keep track of them with any notes that you have about the risk and so forth. Just so we go through all this discussion, we want to capture what we actually move forward with tonight as much as we possibly can.
Okay. Yeah, I have an internal document where I track the various iterations of the budget. So I've got that and I can send it out later if we want to.
Okay.
So, I mean, here's a example of the budget where we could say that it's grant covered, but if we could bank on that and then get the rug pulled out from under us if those grants don't come through, which who's to say if they will. What we have been doing, and I want to just highlight these, no changes to these two projects, but these are two grants that we recently got. One of them is for the Sunrise River Headwaters project development, and the other one is for the Goodwin Avenue stormwater wetland, all focusing on the Comfort Lake Management District. This Goodwin Avenue project is just upstream of Comfort Lake. And you see we have grant spend on both of these here. Local spend is 0. It doesn't mean we don't have match, but that means we're covering the match with the staff time. And there's a whole separate, budget formula for the staff time because we've got the total staff on the budget overview, and then it gets distributed via a formula based on the workload analysis and work plan into these various categories. We don't get so specific to put them by project, but separate from this kind of annual budgeting document, we track it very specifically with timesheets and, the accounting and everything. And we're able to do the grant reporting. But
It's
here's a case.
Yeah, it's a requirement of the grant, but it doesn't cost us anything because we're already paying for that staff time through salaries. And this is what gets confusing for people that haven't, done this before because you hear 10% match on the grant. Well, it's offset if it's already something that the district is spending for that project. So if that helps everybody, when she puts these zeros down, there is a cost, but it's made up through, typically it's gonna be the overhead areas. And overhead is inclusive of all staff. I thought it was our engineers too in that preliminary work because they're considered staff. By statute, we're mandated to have an engineer on board for all of our projects. So we can talk about that later, Emily, but I believe that cost can be picked up that way as well. But this is the way that I was talking about, is that you want to tell the public, you want to tell your work story for the coming year. What are we going to be working on? What is our estimated amount for that project? And excuse me, how are we intending to pay for it? And so if our objective is to do this project with a grant, but we don't and can't get the grant dollars, then obviously this project has to be taken off of the 2026 work plan and moved to a future date. Or we find some other source to pay for it. So, but this is good. This is good to show what it is, what our intention is for the coming year. Okay.
Yep. And these are all reflected as well in that project planning separate document that gives a little bit more detail. And there's comments over here on the side, which I'm too zoomed in to show, but project planning attachment kind of helps tell that story as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, those are the 4 main projects that we have in this category. There's still some line items that we show that are on the radar and we're kind of keeping in mind. For example, a potential future alum treatment on Little Comfort Lake. And some of these things are completed in past years, like the JD6 wetland restoration. We won't incur any expenditures on that in 2026, but we're still showing that line because there's 2025 expenditures yet. So, but these are the 4 big ones.
Okay, any projects that are being planned between EOR and the staff for 2026? Okay.
Yep. Besides those 4, I'm going to jump down to wetlands, and we're just going to house it under wetland enhancements. But this is where the Bone Lake South restoration and enhancement work will occur. We just applied for a $1.6 million Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Fund grant for this. And so grant awards are always uncertain, and especially with Lessard Sam's, a big thing that they do is give you a partial award. So they might say, okay, you've asked for 1.6 million. What if we give you half? What can you do with half? And so that's part of our application that we put together is, if we only got partial funding, here's what we can do. And so we've really prioritized the various things that we can do out there. And if we got half of the funding, we can still get a lot of work done out there. And so I think there's a good shot that we could get 50% of that funding request. They also sometimes award 30%. That was what we got for the acquisition one. And so sometimes it's lower, but I'm hoping we can get 50%. And then that doesn't get available until July of 2026. And so I think between July and December, we could theoretically spend, I'm throwing out $100,000 as a placeholder, but just getting project set up, like doing all of the engineering and design and getting the project ordered, and then, by early 2027, maybe even going out for bids. And all of that would be grant covered. That's another one where we requested that all of the implementation, like the contractor costs, any sort of equipment and materials, all of the engineering and legal time would be covered by the grant. And we would provide leverage funds via the staff. So that's why there's a 0 here as well.
It's good.
So just to clarify, so if we win that, we get $100,000 grant, what's our local match gonna be?
Just the staff time, and we proposed a 10%
So
leverage.
you have $11,000 up there to cover that?
Could you say that again?
Yeah, do you have is that $11,000 above that, to cover that local match?
That amount is for the overhead in doing the preparation and the preliminary engineering work. And the grant is actually 1.6 million. Isn't that right?
Yep, it's just what I think we could spend in 2026 with only half a year
Mhm.
of the grants, the funds available.
Yeah.
But Steve, yes, and here I want to just make the point that the staff management and coordination, this isn't an exact, it's driven by the total expense budget on the budget overview. So, when, Administrator Kinney is looking at the staff budget projections and everything, he determines that number. I don't have the salary and benefit information for all of the staff. He gives us that number. Right now it's 1.3 million. And this is just a formula to sort it into all these various lines. And so this is just a general estimate, 0.1 FTEs out of 11.6. But this, it's not that we are tied to 11,000 for wetlands. The big number is on the budget overview. That's what we're committing to. And so if we adjust that budget overview amount, it'll adjust all of these other ones as well. So it's just trying to illustrate that the staff time goes everywhere. It's just spreading out the staff time into all of these, but we would manually track it so that there was an even 10,000 tracked against the leverage for this. Did that part make sense? It's kind of complicated the way we have the budget set up, but it's intended to illustrate just how staff is, putting time toward all these things.
I would
Okay.
assume what Steve is asking though, is that if we are paying for these through our normal overhead, whether it's staff time, operational expense, all of that gets included in that match, that 10% match for the grant. That money coming from the grant after the fact, really becomes part of reserve. Because the reserve is the payback basically from getting that grant that covers all of these things. And so it goes into the reserve, which becomes ours. We control that reserve fund. So if we want to move it to another line item, or there's an emergency situation where it requires funding that wasn't budgeted, if we have enough in the reserve, we can use it for that purpose too. So it becomes a general fund decision of the boards on where to use that. We typically want to protect it though, because that's where we're going to pay for the next 6 months in the new year of overhead.
I want to just clarify that if we, in a grant like this, and in any grant, if we receive $100,000 from this, it's because that we've already spent $100,000. So it's reimbursing us for expenditures that were already incurred for that specific purpose. So it's a reimbursement grant.
Which means our general fund gets paid back that amount of money for that particular project. Unless we're getting the money just as we are incurring the actual expenditure.
Maybe I'm not understanding what you're articulating here, but I don't think it would go to the general fund because all of the staff and overhead that's match, that's leverage. None of the grant funds are going toward that. And specifically, they are not. And that's why we do that reporting. It's going toward implementation funds for this very specific purpose. So it can't pay for the overhead or the staff or anything like that. It's going toward a contractor's pay application or an EOR invoice or a Smith Partners invoice, that sort of thing.
Yeah, which would generally come out of the general fund, but any staff that's working on that project becomes part of that cost as well. So this is a theoretical discussion that we can have at a later time. The bottom line is we are using it correctly as a reimbursable grant. We are committing to that money to get this project going, which the state is counting on before they give the grant dollars to us to make sure that we are committed on our side. So it all works out.
Yep. And then as far as the budget deficit, so, when we get this we can increase revenues by $100,000 if we get this grant, but then we're increasing expenses by $100,000. So it kind of cancels each other out. It doesn't help that negative $993,000 that we're working with, because we have to add the expenditure associated with the revenue.
Okay.
Same.
Let's just move on. This is really a heavy duty finance bookkeeping issue, but
It's a timing, cash flow
Yes.
timing issue.
it is.
We actually really have that 100,000 for
Yeah,
at least 6
exactly.
months. Okay, well, we understand that, okay.
Yeah. Okay,
Well, with the Clean Water Fund grants, you get it in advance, but not with all grants. This one, you incur the expenditure and then you pay yourself back with a reimbursement request.
But the money's
it's a-
already spent, and if it's in the budget already, that means we pick up an extra 100,000 to cover something we've already spent.
right,
And so it moves us closer to our goal.
yeah, it does.
Yeah, for our reserve, but so that's why we wanna keep.
Well, I'm
keep
saying-
track of these, because these all add up to be extra cushions for us a little bit, so.
But
If
I'm
they come
saying
through.
it doesn't. But it doesn't, because if I'm adding in 100,000 of revenue for these two projects, this $100,000 expense wasn't there before. So it cancels each other out. This isn't helping that budget deficit because these expenses weren't there before. You only get the revenue if you incur the expense.
Right, but we've already incurred the expense before you get the $100,000 check, otherwise we wouldn't have got it, received it. So that's sunk money, that's gone. And it's on our expense, financial sheets. So that 100,000 now is something we can play with, and we can use that to,
It just has to be represented properly in
Yeah.
our books. We'll talk about this
that later on,
afterwards,
yeah.
Emily, and we'll get the CPA involved, our new CPA at Red Path involved. There has to be an offset column. That's all that we're dealing with here. Okay, let's move on.
Sure. I do think it's critical to the budget balance conversation that we're having, but I'll keep it moving.
Mhm.
We have a similar situation. So I'll just show you on the original budget, we had a TBD here. So this was a zero, or the expense budget for this was really just the staff time. And so if we get this grant, then revenues will increase by 100,000 and expenses will increase by 100,000. So that budget goes from 69,000 to 169,000. And that's another one. This would be where we would code the Greenbelt and open space. We applied for 3.3 million total. And so it'd be a multi-year project, but putting in 100,000 to get started in 2026. And that would be paying for all of the engineering, all of the legal, and then on the ground costs for easements and acquisitions. So that's why it's in the land acquisition and management. It's easements and acquisitions.
The preliminary work is what we're talking about, right? For these projects.
Well, that's something that we could talk about is, if the board wants to, when we say preliminary work, if the board wants to do kind of the planning and prioritization, we could wait to do that until we have the grant. Or if you want that done by year end, it would have to be covered locally. But it would also include engineering assistance, the preliminary work associated with, reaching out to landowners, preparing the documents,
Sure.
paying for the
Yeah.
easements and the acquisitions themselves.
And this is for 2026. We intend to keep moving forward on this area. And so we have a budget of 100,000 to do that preliminary work, correct? For these new projects.
Yes.
All right, all right. I think we all get that. Let's move on.
Okay. So I talk about projects. There's the land acquisition and management for the Greenbelt easements and acquisitions. I'm going to skip over to programs really quick. There's a few things highlighted here, but I want to focus on non-point source pollution abatement. We have also we've submitted a grant application to a federal pass-through grant through the Fishers and Farmers Partnership. And we requested $80,000 for farmer-led council expansion. And so if that sounds familiar, we brought this past the board and got the authorization to apply for it. It's shown up in all the grant trackers and everything. And so that would enhance the budget for the ag sector here in our agriculture and rural BMP incentives. And so some of that we could divert some of the local spend, and which would help our position. We could reduce local spending by an estimated $5,000 and get $5,000 covered by grants. But really, it's another situation where if you're getting this grant, that means you have to go above and beyond, and you have to spend those dollars. So they give you the grant because they want you to do something that's not just the norm, just not overhead operating. They want to expand the farmer-led council and do events and extra BMPs and things like that. And so those expenses aren't currently in the budget, but if we got the grant, we could add an additional $30,000 of expenses to the budget that would be grant covered.
Okay.
And then 30,000 under ag and ag BMPs, and then splitting it into education outreach as well. It would enhance the education and outreach budget by an estimated $20,000.
Okay.
Or, sorry, I misspoke, an estimated 10,000. We have 10,000 confirmed through our Midwest Glacial Lakes Partnership Grant. And so we already had a 10,000 in there in that revenue and associated expense. If we get this uncertain grant, we could increase it by 10,000, bringing it to a total of 20,000 grant spend in education and outreach.
Okay.
Those are really the big ones. We'll have, and I don't have these numbers here because we need the action plan and we need some project development to occur. But by June 30th, UR is going to have that flood resiliency action plan drafted. And then we're going to be reviewing it with the board at the July 10th meeting. And then, reviewing it with partners, kind of the stuff we were talking about earlier, joint workshops and things like that. And then once we are all kind of on the same page as an organization and with our partners as to the priorities and the sorts of projects that are out there, then we can start working with, the cities, and really the counties are going to be a big one, because recall that the last couple years, it was on our previous 2 December agendas, the district accepted or adopted the county all hazard mitigation plans. And so that is kind of our key to FEMA grant funding. You need to be in that all hazard mitigation plan and adopt that hazard mitigation plan in order to get the FEMA grant funding. And so there's multiple sub-programs that FEMA offers. I've been in touch with our local Minnesota FEMA field office about those. And some of them are pretty competitive. Some of them are really only available in the event of a disaster, like emergency response. But there is a program that is available for, preventative kind of work that we're trying to do. We want to install a project to mitigate flooding before the disaster happens. That's another one where, federal grants, there's a lot of uncertainty. There might be some cuts. We'll apply. We are going to keep going through the process and at least be able to get on the waiting list. You know, you start the process by submitting a letter of interest for your specific project. So once we have those specific projects identified, like this site on the map, here's, you know, exactly what the project entails, we can get on the list. It might not go through, but you know, we can see. There's also local or state grant funding that we can go for. A number of programs, I could go through each of them if we wanted. They require varying degrees of match. Like the DNR has a flood hazard mitigation program, but it requires a 50% match, which you know, with our budget projections, I don't think we can do. So if we wanted to go for a DNR grant, we'd probably have to get a federal grant to help cover the match. There's also programs through NPCA, which would be really promising. There's one through the Board of Water and Soil Resources, which we've applied to in the past for to cover some of the engineering, like the project development. We've applied twice. We were unsuccessful both times. We're not located in the priority area, which is kind of the Minnesota River Basin and other areas of the state. So that might have something to do with it. But yeah, there's a few programs out there. And once we have our prioritized project list, we can start going out for them and try to cover it as much as possible so that the expense and the revenue cancel each other out. You know, we add $2 million of expenses for a big capital improvement project, for a flood resiliency project, but then it's balanced by $2 million of revenue. And hopefully we could cover the match with the staff time or with an opposing grant.
Okay,
So
I
those
just want to remind you, I just want to remind you of the comment that the MPCA had, the question actually, at that last climate impact committee that I'm on. They were asking very specifically if any members on the committee, their organizations had an immediate need for money for a project, or one that was in the planning stage. You know, how would we use money for flood resiliency, climate extremes, if we had it? Do we have a project ready, or do we have a project in the pipeline? So they asked that question, and there's a reason behind it. That's not just filling air. That is asking people on these organizations if they have a need for some immediate funding. So when Mike gets back, you know, that has to be a topic of conversation. I don't want to wait too much longer to miss the opportunity. Okay, so let's work on that next week.
I
We can
believe
touch
it was
base.
noted in the last summary of board direction.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. So it is
I
part of
sent
our
it to
board
them
direction.
today.
Oh, perfect.
She what? I didn't hear.
I sent it to their staff today, and they said that it's just they're taking the temperature, you know, it's nothing formal, but they can add it to the notes. And so got
Good.
that sent out.
All right, very good. Okay, well, this looks good. So I think we understand now what projects are going to be prepared, let's say. And the funding has to be started in order to complete it. We get that. But these are on the plan for next year. Anything else you want to tell us about?
We're working on a few other grants, and hopefully we'll have something for you to consider in July. But to be determined. We're still kind of formulating some other things, but trying to cover those operational costs as much as possible, with kind of getting creative with the grant writing, and, you know, making our work fit the mold that, you know, granting agencies want to see.
Absolutely. All right, thank you. Can you bring up the fund for the repayment of our loans? Your sheet. Yeah, there we go. And where are we at for 2026? What is the total payback amount for that for next year?
As of now, if we don't take out any more loans, the 2026 loan repayment is 514,000. And so if you wanted to levy for 400,000 of it, we would take 114,000 out of that savings, drawing that savings down from 400,000 to 287. And that would just kind of help pay for it. And you can kind of see how we draw down over the next few years that savings account, and then it's zero by 2029.
Okay. Let's just, start with 540, did you say?
14.
14, okay. Is there anything else, like this in a dedicated fund that we need to pay back? I know the one for the municipal, and I think community needs under the non-point source area has been 98, I think it is.
That
Commercial
one,
a commercial property, it's under the fund balance. Do you show the funds? The separate funds?
you want to see the expense revenue recap of all the funds?
No, the money, it's like a park fund. So it's the money when commercial properties cannot treat their water, their stormwater on their own
Mhm.
property. They make a donation, not a donation, but they pay into this dedicated fund.
Mhm.
And so it's
Yes.
not spent, it's not supposed to be spent for anything except that reason. We haven't used that ever. So we've got 98,000 in that fund that we either
Yes.
need to, yeah, we need to figure out a way to use it, or we can move it into the general fund.
Yes. I'm not sure we can just move it into the general fund. We'd probably want to talk with Chuck, but it probably has to be associated with an implementation cost of a volume control
Yeah.
facility.
Obviously, all of this stuff has to be run, by the attorney for accuracy and so on, but I'm just pointing out areas where we've got money sitting somewhere. We've got a big one where money has to go out at 514,000 for the entire 2006 year. And this is one where money sits. So I'm trying to identify those.
Where does that show up on our sheets?
It doesn't. It never has, and that's why I worked so hard to get those funds separated out. It was on the first, it was on the the treasurer's report last month for the first time, where we had all of those dedicated funds listed.
And what's that called? A water fund?
Stormwater impact fund
Sort of,
Thank
okay.
you.
or something.
I can
along
pull
those
that
lines.
up.
We also should have our reserve fund shown every month so that we know exactly where we're at with that. There it is.
So would you like me to go through the other, dedicated funds we presently have?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yep, so 95,376 is in the bank right now, earmarked for stormwater impact implementation to offset the commercial sites that were unable to treat stormwater sufficiently. The Heath Iron Enhanced Sand Filter, that is a big part of our cash balance right now, but that's one where we really need to have it preserved and ready to go so that next fall, when we are, getting those big contractor pay applications, that'll get spent at that time. The Sunrise Headwaters project development, it's an accelerated implementation grant, AIG. That is 59,000 in the bank right now. We'll kind of be deducting from that as we go. EOR is working on that project, and we can keep updating this as we go, and we spend these grant funds, move it from unearned into earned revenue, so this number will go down. Same with engineering for the Heath Iron Enhanced Sand Filter. As we spend engineering funds, we can move, theoretically move money from the dedicated fund into earned revenue. So we're paying ourselves back for those expenses we're incurring. We have 3 grants from Washington County AIS Prevention Aid for aquatic invasive species management. We haven't, some of these will get an initial payment, like the first 50% upfront, and it'll be unearned revenue that we'll need to hold aside. We got that payment for Flowering Rush. I think we just received one for watercraft inspections, but that's, that program's already underway, so it's all earned immediately anyway. It'll stay at 0. It's, we don't need to dedicate any of it. It's just being earned immediately as soon as we receive it. Same with the curly leaf pondweed. Working on grant requests for that, so we can pay ourselves back for that big expenditure that we just incurred from Lake Management Inc. There is a remaining balance of the Moody Lake capstone projects. This will get spent as we do the signage is really the big one, as well as the agricultural BMPs just upstream of Moody Lake that Aiden is working with that landowner on. We should be able to spend that. And then once this is spent, there's still another 10% that we can request from Bowser. So can reimburse ourselves for that. But this one's overall coming in under budget due to how low the project bids were. Fly Avenue Feedlot, we're calling it School Lake Agricultural BMPs, primarily is the project name now. That one Aiden is working with the landowner on, and we are earning some of that grant revenue as we incur expenditures, whether that's for technical assistance from EOR or the Conservation District, or on the ground practices like doing agricultural BMPs or feedlot treatment. WGD6 Western Tributary Wetland, that is the project we just did kind of south of Highway 97, off Highway 97 south of Forest Lake. That one, it also really came in under budget because the construction bids were a lot lower than we expected. We are gonna, as long as we get the signage, the design finished and the fabrication, installation, everything done by year end, these funds for GD6 and for Moody Capstone can cover those signage costs, but it has to be done before year end because those grants are expiring. Forest Lake alum treatment, that one, so, and perhaps this is already known for everyone, but I'll just recap very briefly. The way these Clean Water Fund grants work, and that's most of these here, is you get your grant award, you execute the grant agreement, and then they give you 50% upfront. So that's what we have here. We got 50% for the alum treatment, which was $200 and something thousand. We spent all but 30,000 of it on that first treatment last fall. And so we've just been kind of hanging on to this 30,000, and it'll get spent as soon as we get the pay application for phase 2, which is occurring this fall. So what I will need to be, I will be on top of is, we'll move that 30,000 into earned revenue, and then I complete that grant reporting in the eLink portal for the Board of Water and Soil Resources and request the next installment to pay ourselves back and be able to pay those bills. So we're hanging on to 30,000, and there's another, 200 and something thousand coming.
And when will that come? You think in the fall?
Yeah, October.
Okay. So basically, using that as an example, we're spending, or we're gonna spend the money and then we'll pay it out of the 30,738. Is that correct?
You know, the bill is gonna be 280,000 or something like that, and so
Okay.
we'll move this 30,000 into earned revenue, and then I'll request a deposit from Bowser, and they'll send us the rest of the grant.
Okay. And do we have that alum treatment cost on this budget sheet? I'm just looking for it right now. I thought we had it on here.
Yep, it's 2025 expense. It's zero in 2026 because we'll be done, but it is
That's correct, right, okay.
320,000 estimated year end in 2025. And I've got the associated revenues shown in the grant breakout, and then that comes over into the expense revenue recap.
Okay.
Okay? You have anything else to show us?
I think that's really the highlights for, you know, the projects and everything. There's some things in maybe other parts like that we might want to look at, like the admin, you know, the office rent, getting new computers, things like that. If we wanted to look, there's certainly smaller in nature than you know, this 1.3 million we're talking here. But there's
I don't think personally we need to spend time on that unless there is a unusually large expense. I know that we're getting computers updated, so how much is that gonna be? 100,000, 75,000? What is that number for next year?
Oh,
Either this year- Yeah, go ahead.
for next year, I think it would be on the order of more like 8 to 10,000.
Yeah. I don't think we need to talk about that. I mean, if it gets to be 50,000 or more, I think we should know about it, but this is just routine. It should be built into the routine of that section. I mean, computers need to be replaced every 3 to 4 years. Sometimes it goes longer, but for efficiency's sake, you want to do that. So that should be something that you've already built into this budget for those areas.
Built in, it's just a matter of, you know, the manager's computers are the ones that are up for renewal next year. And so that would be roughly 1,000 per computer for replacement, plus a few staff are due for renewal next year too, so.
Yeah,
But again, it's an opportunity if you wanted to be a little tighter and extend it a year later, and then we could use that cash this year to cover some of our needs. So those are the kinds of
well,
things,
2026, this expenses for 2026 though,
right?
not this year.
So, right, but I mean, what I'm saying is that instead of doing it in 2026, we got it budgeted for 2026 right
Mhm.
now, but we wouldn't do it until 2027. Rebudget again and use that money this year to cover some of our shortcomings. And so it's just that kind of thinking that you have to go around looking at where you can. Same way, for example, on our education fund, if we are in our shoreline program, I think we got $60,000 in there for grants. If for some reason we only spend 40 of it, that gives us $20,000 towards our goal of getting to that, you know, that number we have to get at. So that's the kind of thinking staff has to do, and then on the other hand, you've got some areas that are gonna over. And if they're gonna be over, we need to know that too.
Oh, that's what we're trying to get
Right,
through here.
right.
But the bottom line is, we've got $1 million to make up, you know. We do. That's our deficit.
Right.
So I would, if there's no questions about the expense side. Like, you know, did anybody have a question on any of these other areas? Anything more particular that you want to ask?
Well, I think we should make a list of where we can cut costs by
Let's
delaying.
let's talk about revenue first, okay? Just humor me for 10 more minutes.
Sure.
All right, do we have any questions about the expense budget?
Not here.
Okay. Thank you. I want to spend some time now on revenue streams. We've got levy. we've got bank. And we've got the, loans from the MPCA. And, I have a recommendation. And obviously, it's just a starting point, just from thought. Some thoughts and some. Lots of, hours working some numbers, but. I think that we need to split it up between these three revenue sources so that we're not overburdening any one of them. Until we are comfortable that, we don't have any chance of shortcoming. I'm very concerned that we get through this coming month and, the balance of this year, not to even mention going into the next year. So we're gonna have to spend some more time with Emily and the accountants to get to where we expect the end of this year to be. Before we make a final decision, but I just want to throw this out for conversation. It's a good thing we're starting early here so that we have some time. We've got, another 10 weeks almost before we have to have a final budget. So these are concepts for you to think about, not have a decision tonight. But we'll keep working toward that, over the next, 10 weeks or so, whatever it ends up being. But I would really like everyone to think about splitting it between those three revenue sources. So that we're going to have to do a levy larger than 4%. There's no question in my mind about that. And if you look back at the history of our levy increases, we had the largest one that we had was back at 2018, maybe. I don't remember the exact date. Emily, if you have that handy, you can pull it up, but it doesn't matter right now. We all have that back at home in our papers, but we had a 25% increase in that year, and it's on part of the annual report that you get, so you can go back and look at it. And that was one of those, remember those steps I've explained in the past? Well, that was one of those steps that we had to make because we knew we were going to come into a period of a lot of big projects. And so we needed to have the revenue to cover that. And also to provide, we budget for 18 months, the budget's actually for 12, but we've got to make sure that we are protecting our overhead expenses for that next 6 months into the next year. So look at it as an 18-month revenue budget and a 12-month expense budget. Accommodating for that reserve fund or carryover, it used to be called carryover fund. So I would like to entertain some discussion on, not tonight, but when you're ready, to do a levy increase somewhere above 12%. I wouldn't want to go any lower than that, but 12% to that 25% level. The bank, I think Steve and I and Mike can talk to our banking representative about setting up some type of line of credit. We've got a $2 million ceiling by state statute. So if we could set up a line of credit type of situation where we access it as we need it, but we're comfortable that we have that in our back pocket and ready. And then I would like Emily to look at what the availability for taking out another loan from the MPCA. She told us that there's a limit of 3.5 million, I think, annually. Is that correct, Emily?
There's 3.5 million available, but you can only get 750,000 at a time.
That's right. But the 3.5 million, is that per entity or is that per the state of Minnesota?
Whole state.
The whole state?
Yep.
We're one of the few that actually access that fund from what I understand. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's us and a few others. Washington County is one of them.
Okay,
Is that for 2025 or 2026?
well, we could do either one.
I mean, is it if it's only 3.5 for the whole state, and it's this year, they may not even have the program next year.
No, I don't.
So I'm just trying to
Well,
understand,
well, that's true too, though. There is a possibility that that program won't be available for next year. Have you heard anything like that, Emily?
Was wondering that. I asked our state representative, and he actually seemed to think that there was a pretty good availability of that program. It's from
Okay.
the state revolving fund, so maybe
And that
not
requires
subject
a
to the same
7-year
fluctuations as
payback?
federal.
or is that?
Seven-year payback at 1.5%.
Yep.
And that's only after it's been fully drawn on though, correct?
Yes,
Okay,
you
So,
do
you know, if you
incur
look at-
interest in the disbursement period. The longer you have the loan open and are drawing from it, the more interest you're incurring during that period.
okay.
I did a quick calculation. I thought it was 7 years. I didn't have any interest in it, but you know, the leverage on that isn't very good.
Mhm.
So for every 100,000 you borrow, you only get 25% gain on reducing our debt.
Mhm. But it's something,
It's
25%.
something, 25 cents, yeah, but it's still.
You gotta take all of that into
Right.
consideration.
But I'm saying you can do the same kind of thing with our own budgets by looking at some of the things I suggested, so you don't have to
Maybe.
use a loan and so forth.
Maybe,
which is, yeah.
maybe.
Okay.
But what do we want to? We should be thinking about that. What do we want to take out? As far as keeping our forward momentum going on our projects?
That's why I wanted to talk to staff, because staff has to
Mhm.
make that judgment. We can't make that judgment. I can give you areas where I think it could be cut out. But they have to be more realistic on what's practical and what's not practical. So.
Well, but our,
So for example, the business manager may not hire, that's gonna save us a lot of money next year and that couple of years. So just as an example, you know, so, those are things that, and do you do that rather than burdening yourself with more loans and more debt? So it all has to be, you know, reconciled with the community. And so you gotta do a little bit of both. It's what you're trying to do. I'm just saying we gotta make sure we look at the expense side of it also.
of course.
Okay.
That's part of the whole process. So the loan from the MPCA then is available. So right now it's just identifying what's available from these other streams. So we've got levy, we've got the bank. And we've got the potential loan from the MPCA of 3.5 million, which doesn't seem to be going anywhere to anyone else. And 750 at a time, right?
Yes,
Do you have to take the full 750 or can you take less than that?
I'm
I mean,
not
that
sure.
only- that only
If
gives
you,
5 loans they can give out in the whole year. That doesn't seem like.
you can,
we need
if
to
we
find
wanted to
that out.
ask for 500,000, we could. If you get awarded a loan for 750,000, you could probably do an amendment and lower that if you wanted. But the longer you just sit on it, say you get approved for $750,000 loan, you spend 500,000, you say, let's just stop for a little bit. That grant is still open and the clock is still ticking on that interest that you're accumulating during the disbursement period. And so I think we would want to decide the amount and then apply for that, execute the agreement with PCA and spend that amount.
Right. It doesn't do any good to take a loan and then sit on it, not put it to use, is what you're saying.
Put it in treasury and you get 4.5%. You know,
Good.
pay 1.5%, but they probably
Yeah.
wouldn't like that.
Probably not. Anyway, that's.
Well, it's a
that's-
reimbursement grant loan.
Pardon me?
It's a reimbursement loan. So it's again, you have to spend it first
Mhm.
in order to get it. So you're paying yourself back.
Okay,
Mhm.
so you can't sit on it then.
No. It would
Okay.
defer levy funds, you could be sitting on it during those first 6 months of the year when we're waiting for the levy, from like a cash flow perspective, but you got to spend it to get it.
Well, and that's why we shouldn't make decisions until we get full understanding of all of these sources. Right now, it's just laying out the sources of revenue. And one of the other ones, there is a fourth, and that is if we wanted to do bonding. We could take the year's expenses, for example, or whatever we wanted to do, really include. Maybe programs too, and do a bond for that. And I'm not sure, we'd have to look into the details of this, if we would have to do it as part of Washington County or through Chisago County. I think we can act independently as a watershed, but I don't know for sure. So we need to get some details from Chuck or whoever our advisor is there on what that might look like.
I can look into that.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be more like what cities do for street projects and other big projects.
Is Mike on this call?
He was gonna try, but he hasn't made it.
Oh, he's listed there. I just wonder if he's connected.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Is he connected?
Yes. Yes, I've been,
Oh. Okay,
You must be taking very good notes. You're awfully quiet.
into the board discussion. It's been interesting. But thank you.
We must be doing pretty well, though. We haven't had any suggestions from you. Okay, glad to have you on, Mike, because I was hoping you were hearing all of this because it's, as Manager Anderson said, it's important and it's also complicated, so.
mhm, yeah.
And we don't fully understand all these angles yet either, so.
No, so, and that was my objective for tonight, is to get through the projects that have already been identified by engineers and staff for 2026. If there's anything remaining that is not covered for 2025, we didn't talk about that, but we should have that before our next, board workshop on the budget. And then, all of these revenue streams that we've been talking about here at the end, we need to make sure that we understand each one of them thoroughly. So whoever our guide is for that, whether it's Chuck or it's our CPA lead over at Redpath, we need to get all of that information so that we can get it out to the board as soon as possible and at our next meeting, be talking about this. My concept again tonight was to look at all of these revenue streams so that we're not burdening just one. And we're looking at the best combination of those to get us back whole. And it's gonna take a few years. No, I don't think any more than 3, but we gotta be diligent about it and smart about it and make sure that we're not damaging our forward momentum. We still have a lot left to do for the watershed. And I would hate to see us take a break from this success that we've been having and complete the entire district before we relax.
President
And that's
Anderson,
all
could I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
You were saying that you would like to arrange for someone from Redpath and or Chuck to attend the next budget meeting, or would it be sufficient if I could just find out some more information about bonding and then I could speak to the other revenues and things like that?
No, I was expecting that we would find that information out by reaching out to an expert and I'd be happy to be on the calls if you'd like. That I wouldn't mind that at all. And if we feel that we need to have someone come in and just talk to us for 10 or 15 minutes about the concept, we can certainly do that. I think the levy and the loan from the MPCA, I think we get that. We might want to have a little bit more understanding of that. Oh, one thing, as long as we're talking MPCA, sometime last year or so, I told you about the conversation I had with our representative at that time. And there is a oversight council at the MPCA that handles bigger projects, most of them municipal in nature, but they all have to do with stormwater. And he was offering his support in us going to that council and asking for more money than was actually available through the general avenue that we use for the watersheds. And that certainly is something that we need to find more out about, and what are we talking about? To me, it sounded like at the time that we were talking about more like Lassard Sam money. We're talking about multiple millions of dollars, and if that's the case, we need to know about that too.
Yeah, I met with them and it's the Public Facilities Authority and the State Revolving Fund. I could speak more on those if you would like as well. I've got a page of notes I took from my meetings with them.
Okay, yes, absolutely. Whatever you know, why don't you put it into a memo form and then send it to all of the board? And then we have time to read it.
Okay.
And I know that we have an officer or an accountant or whatever they're called, the outreach person for the bonding companies. So maybe if we can get something from them or have them come and talk to us or at the next board workshop for 10-15
The
minutes.
Clean Water Partnership, MPCA.
No,
loan?
this, no, this is for a bond. We're going to have to reach out to, I think, our chief CPA at Red Path for that.
Okay.
Okay. And then the last thing, I wanted to know is, what does it look like for us for the balance of the year? We're going to have our 2 levy amounts, of course, for the next 6 months of the year. For the balance of the year, so how does it look? Maybe you'll have that already, maybe that'll be part of the next month's treasury report too. Red Path will probably have that worked in, so we can see where we're at.
Yeah, I was gonna mention, again, his expenses are an important part of this, and Mike at the last meeting said he was going to work on certain areas that we had identified, I had
Mhm.
identified. Mike, I hope you're gonna continue to have staff work on that because, you know, we were looking at how we could maybe pass some of the permitting costs on to the public. We spent about 280,000 next year on that. So some of that could be passed on to the public, through permitting, et cetera. That would save money. You've got the monitoring. We talked about dropping some of the monitoring for a few years, et cetera. We've got district rules. We already got 83,000. I don't know what we can do in that area, but staff has a better insight to those things than we do. And then at the same time, we need to look at things like our shoreline restoration program. We got 60,000 in there for grants. As that program moves through the summer, we need to know whether that's gonna end up at 59,000 or 35,000 or 85,000. Can't go over 60. But if it's gonna be under 60, that's money that's available again to help us get through this year. So hopefully, and we can't make those judgments, but same way, we may overrun on certain projects too. If that happens, we need to know that too, being over the budget. And so if you could get staff thinking this way, Mike, and then working on some of these areas, it would be helpful. It's gonna contribute, it could contribute quite a few dollars, so. Just wanna reinforce that once again as treasurer.
Yes, Madam President, managers, Schmaltz staff has been working on that and will should be by the early July timeframe, be able to provide a list of suggestions.
Okay, great.
President Anderson,
Yes, and Lois, go ahead.
can I ask Mike, like what magnitude he suspects those might come out at? As far as expenses that could either be deferred or maybe completely removed?
Madam President, Manager Loza, managers, I would not suspect there, anything it's going to be one of those where just like some of the other pieces that Emily was describing about, being able to move 5 or 10,000 or 20 or something here and there. in this case, the biggest thing would be within the area of the permitting. That would have the most likely the biggest component. We probably we could potentially save up to about $40,000 in our monitoring by scaling that back and just taking a longer view and statistical average of what we have, and especially like the stream using that ISCO monitoring systems that we have. We have a very good data set, and that we don't necessarily use that information for year in and year out watershed management. But it's provided the district a lot of insight. And so if we went to an every other year framework for that, we feel confident that that would continue just to give us an insight as to, like, there's no significant changes within those points in between, typically like on Lofton Avenue at Bone Lake Outlet, Forest Lake Outlet, things like that, certain sites where we would not expect anything to really materially change in those numbers, because it's the water coming out of the lakes, which we're sampling through the camp program. So we wouldn't necessarily see big changes. So, but we would think that we could increase the amount of savings, if you will, or reduce the levy dollars used for the permitting program by shifting more of it onto the actual permitting piece. So I think in total, to kind of get to your question, I think it's realistic that we could probably cut about 100,000 out of the expense side.
So I mean, I appreciate that information and feedback. I'm all for savings and looking at areas where we can cut on expenses or defer them if it makes sense. But from all the conversation that we've had tonight, I'm getting a sense that this is more of a revenue problem and less of an expense problem. Is that a fair generalization of where we feel like we're at?
Manager Lowe's,
It is.
yes, managers, I think, yes, I think that, well, I mean, as the board, I mean, it's really, if you want to continue to doing the work at the level of that we've been doing it in recent years, then it's going to be the revenue side. I mean, otherwise, when you're talking about cutting expense, really, because Emily noted a lot of the work, we're on an ongoing basis, our work plan, we're using adaptive management to do the work based on the availability of funds and revenues and grants and activities, et cetera. So if you go to a scenario where you're looking to potentially cut a position or two, well, then you don't have the staff to do the work. So, that's a strategy that maybe some folks from the outside might want to suggest that the board take, but I think that from everything that I've heard, the board wants to continue to pursue the work that we have identified, that we've been working toward, and we're certainly way ahead of schedule on the water quality side, to be able to take on this additional work in terms of flood resiliency. But yes, I would agree it's more of a revenue.
On the other hand, just because we're a government unit doesn't mean we have to think like a government unit.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen where that's got us over the last 50 years. So I think you need to get a combination of all areas. Everybody contributes a little bit. That's how we did it at 3M. And I think, you can't just raise your levy. I mean, as much as we'd like to or have to cover our costs, et cetera. So I think it's a combination of everything working together. And when you do that, I think then the public's going to be much more receptive to the final solution that we work out, which will include, obviously, an increase in the revenue too. So we don't have to use chainsaws.
No, we don't have to use chainsaws. And we
Well, that
don't-
was never the
and
intention, but
We don't have to always look at an increase in the levy as gloom and doom. We've done it in the past,
no, I know.
you know, and it was for other areas of the watershed and the results have been spectacular. So we have to keep that in mind, what our purpose is, and we are the least expensive line item on a tax schedule. So everything's in proportion, everything is relative. As Mr. Einstein used to say, and that is true.
Except the bump that we did 15 years ago is not as noticeable as the bump that's gonna occur on our budget, our levy today, if we do the same percentage.
Our levies have not increased by that amount. It has not. It has not. There's just no way around it. We pay more per capita in Chisago County for all the work that's been done in Washington County by about 30%. Because we don't have any commercial properties to offset the residential, so it's all residential that's borne the burden. So if we wanna get out violins and start, you know, tapping them, I'll start that concert.
You were talking about relativity, that was a relativity comparison, so,
Yeah, I got it.
all right.
Anyway, the point is that we've got multiple sources of revenue. We don't have to overburden one. And we need more detail on all of them so that we can make a good decision as a board on how to proceed. But I have to agree that this is a revenue problem. It's not a work output problem. And I would not want to see efficiencies. Yes, we should always be striving for efficiency. And I'd like to understand more about why we're not collecting what we should for the permit program, because that's the whole foundation of it, is not put the burden on the public. And I thought we were already in a program that did that for us, so something's not right. So we need to figure that out, but beyond that, though, if that's not the problem, then our problem is definitely spending more than we had, basically tapping into, the only thing that we could have done is tap into that dedicated fund balance that sits in our, from grants that sits in our bank account and collects interest for us. Because we do get a lot of that money, as Emily explained, before we actually have that expense on some of our grants, when we're getting 50% up front. So we have taken advantage of that, and we need to rein that in and make sure that we have backup sources that are proper. And I think we can do it. I'm not frightened by the challenge. I think we've got four different opportunities here. And once we get the backgrounds for all of them, it'll be very clear. Steve, maybe you and I can talk to the bank representative
Sure.
about the line of credit, and we can get that nailed down and ready to go if the board wants to do it. And by how much, that would take care of a big part of it. So I think by the next time, Emily, if you can work on that other background stuff, call me. If you need me to be on the phone call, I'd be happy to do that. And review with Red Path some of the information that we need from them. I think that's it for me. Anybody else? No? Okay, when can we meet? next?
President Anderson,
Oh, yes, Manager Baki, go ahead.
I appreciate the fact that we're getting an early start on this conversation regarding the 2026 budget. But I'm not hearing enough discussion about having a balanced budget that we can operate under. Our fund balance is dropping to zero. You suggested increasing the levy as an option, taking out a line of credit from the bank, and also taking out another loan from the MPCA. I understand that, and I'm willing to be a part of that conversation, but I need to hear more about why we would choose that route rather than trying to balance our budget and operate under the funds that we have. As you know, we have to go to our public with this. And there are going to be people who would not be pleased to hear about just taking out loans and increasing the levy as a way of balancing our budget. So I think we need to also have a balanced discussion as we go forward. I appreciate Mike's input in giving us a figure of $100,000, you know, as something we should be looking at. But again, I think we have to talk to our public about this and make sure they're comfortable with the route that we're going to take.
Yes, and that's why we need to know more and be absolutely clear about all of these different options. So tonight was a discussion of where we're at, what our project list is gonna look like for 2026. What things do we want to get rid of if we have to? But I don't think we're there. I don't think we're at that level just yet. So we have to understand where we're gonna be at the end of this year. Our 2 levy amounts are coming in July and December. And our levy was 1.8, I think, close to that, right? So we should have 900,000 coming in 4 weeks, 5 weeks here, at the first part of July. And then we'll have that 900,000 around December 20th or so. So where are we gonna end up when we put that into our reporting and into our cash flow? It's all about cash flow right now.
President Anderson?
Yes,
If Mike was able to come up with the 100,000 of maybe what I would consider just being more efficient with our efforts. And then if we were to shave 900,000 off the budget to balance it, would staff feel like that would be a loss of momentum or progress for the watershed, or like is that a scenario that we should seriously be considering? Or I guess I haven't been involved long enough to get a sense of progression. I mean, 5 years is a long time, but in the whole grand scheme of things, it's not. And when a watershed's moving so fast, sometimes it's hard to have perspective, I guess. So is that something that we should be considering, or
I think everything should be considered. Whether or not it can happen also has to be considered. What's the outflow from taking that action? So that's a pretty serious. I mean, we would have to shut down quite a lot. And maybe it's because we're talking about revenue here, we can stop projects that are not yet completed, but we can't benefit any money from that unless we cut staff. Our biggest expense is staff.
yeah, it seems
So-
to me that a lot of the project expense is covered with revenue. So it's
Mhm.
you got it on both sides of the ledger there. So
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then so that really doesn't help you balance the budget.
No, it doesn't, not at all.
So again, if we were to shave 900,000 off of our expenses, excluding projects, what does the watershed look like with that kind of with that kind of a budget? Like, are we
Mhm.
talking personnel being let go? Like, is this something that we
No.
could is this something that we could potentially entertain and survive, you know, for a year if we wanted to try to take a year of a break of progress? I don't know what else what you want to call it.
It's project
Deferred
loss.
project.
It's
Sure.
project loss. And it's project loss for the Comfort Lake sub-watershed. That's really where it's gonna hurt.
Well, really what you're coming down to is rather than cutting out projects, which is not gonna save you any money. Really, it's not, because there's not much money to be saved there in certain terms. We have a staff, we should be able to do our project with our staff. But by eliminating and doing streams every 2 years rather than every 1 year, that's not impacting staff at all. I mean, a lot of that's being done by EOR, so basically, it's,
Well, we have to
It's-
pay them.
right.
We have to pay them.
Right, but they just get
Yeah.
less revenue, because, and plus the fact we're not using that data as much as we do some of the other data, so kind of tweaking and being, a little bit more, wise in how we use our money and our time is all we're trying to do at this point in time.
Yeah, and identify those things. Like I
Right.
said, we've got 10 weeks basically before the budget has to be finalized and our two information meetings with the public take place. So let's not jump to any conclusions, keep an open mind and let's see where we come up. We'll get a report from Mike here and we'll get reports on each of these revenue streams, the advantages and disadvantages of each. And we'll see, keep in mind that most of the projects that we're talking about are going to be paid by grants. And so they're not coming out of the levy, just as all of our other projects.
Right.
Were by grants, and so we don't want to stop that momentum, in my opinion. That would be silly. And we've got the value of time. We don't have to solve all of this problem. We have to make sure that we cover this year's expenses, but going forward, we have some time where we don't have to be so dramatic, thinking and cutting so dramatically each year, because we're actually building up something that was depleted because of primarily the COVID situation and using 700,000 out of our reserve at the time to pay for what we had to pay out of pocket instead of through a grant.
The other thing we talked about at the beginning, and Manager Anderson has a pretty aggressive view of how much we have to have on hand to cover our operating costs and so forth. I would say probably more aggressive than we've ever done in the past. So if you go back and look at what our history is and working on the cash that we do have, even though it may not be, quote, entirely legitimate, not saying illegal, but illegitimate, if we go back to that same kind of standard, we might be able to get by with having less reserve at the end of the year. So that's one of the things I want to look at as treasurer, to see what we've been operating on in the past for a number of years to get it from 1 year to the next, and then compare it to what we are asking now to do, which was raising the bar quite a bit, I think, at a time when we really can't afford to raise the bar, if anything. So to get by a year or two till we get caught up.
Well, we don't want to be in this situation where we're concerned about cash flow.
No.
So that's the whole point.
So I'll have some numbers next meeting on that perspective, and then we can take a look. I can work with Emily on this, and we can take a look at how we've operated in the past. And in terms of, what we maximally would have to have and what we actually had and got by for a number of years without any issues. So. Okay, good meeting.
Remember though, that the higher balances have been driven by our big projects and our big grants for those projects. So that's what's been sitting in our bank account, our savings account.
Right.
Providing $60,000 a year in passive income. So, we've benefited from that too, but when your big projects go away, the big balance in your savings account.
And are you talking about unearned grant revenue?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, like Manager Anderson, we've got 98,000 for stormwater sitting there. We've been using that all along, part of it, and just like we've been using other grant money. Now, okay, it's not maybe quite kosher to do that, but I mean, it's smart business to do it. I mean, every businessman is gonna do it if possible. And we've been operating that way for the last 10 years. So why would we change the rules now to make it even more difficult when we've got the most difficult situation we're facing? So I'm just saying that's another degree of freedom that we can work with, I think, as we look at this total picture.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
It's not,
That's probably our easiest way to get out of this, so
well,
to lower the bar a little bit.
we'll have to talk about it and make a decision as a board. But this isn't gloom and doom.
No, it's not.
This is a problem that has to be solved, and we've got solutions sitting in front of us, and we just need to understand each of those solutions and their pathway, their outcome, their impact, and make the right decision.
President
Okay.
Anderson,
Yes.
could we end on a few housekeeping items, looking ahead?
Certainly.
So as a reminder, per our budget schedule that the board approved earlier this year, we were going to review this with the Citizen Advisory Committee. That is tomorrow. The CAC meets tomorrow, June 17th, 5 p.m. at the district office. On their agenda, I will kind of summarize what the board has been discussing and just solicit feedback from the CAC members, kind of about the things that we've been talking about. Not necessarily getting into the numbers per se, but soliciting feedback about priorities and things like that. And I will report back to the board about that. And of course, if managers would like to attend, certainly can do, as long as we don't have a quorum. And then would we like to talk about scheduling the next board budget workshop? And if we would like to discuss this, we have a regular board meeting next Thursday, June 26th. As of now, the agenda isn't super heavy. We could discuss some things. I could maybe present those memos that we talked about here at that regular board meeting, or schedule the next budget workshop. However the board would like to proceed.
Well, my personal feeling is that we would want to do this weekly until we get this background issues understood, and that we put together a plan, at least at the outline of a plan. I don't even want, I don't think I want this presented to the CAC yet. We're in such except in very general terms that, we're looking at all of these different things, and we're getting those details together before we can actually sit down and start seriously considering different options.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I was gonna say something if you
Yeah.
had said, I don't think this should go to the CAT because it's just too unstructured right now. And unstructured, usually if it gets out, means that we've got a big problem.
Right.
And we don't have a big problem, and we don't want the public to start getting in our case like they did with Willow Point. And this could very well happen if we're not careful how we handle this whole thing.
Right.
So I would rather wait when we have some numbers that we're comfortable with. And then get their opinion on it, if they have any other thoughts or additions.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the real important one for me is going to be the look at year end 2025 with the revenue, where we're at now, and the revenue coming in from the levies in July and December.
Well, and I should clarify, the expense revenue recap in the budget workbook reflects that. So
Okay.
there is an estimate, 2025 estimated year end. It includes those levy dollars. It includes an estimate for earned grant revenue, and then all of the year end estimated expenditures.
Here. And where do we end up on that number?
Under,
Was it a 34
yeah, it was
thought it was-
this, so.
low at 40,000 or
Yeah,
something?
expenditures are anticipated to exceed revenues by almost 400,000. So we ended last year fund balance of 1.4 million. It brings the fund balance from 1.4 million down to 1 million.
Okay.
And then we go into 2026 with that 1 million, and that's how we get down to the 39,000.
Emily, have you updated the master sheets with those possible budget numbers you talked about? I mean, not budget number, possible grant numbers? Is that now the new straw plan for us, or are we sticking with the original one that we've been working with?
I have a file that reflects that. I also have a file that reflects some potential cuts. We've got a few different versions we could go forward with. I haven't distributed anything except for the original one yet, though.
Well, I guess I'd like to see the worksheet that you showed on the screen, with the yellow, where you said, if we get this grant, then we get, this could help us a little bit, et cetera. I wrote that down with my hands, but I'd like to see your sheets on that. That's all, just basically the program and the project sheets where you made those adjustments in yellow.
Okay,
And then I want to look at them to see how you added them into the total, just so I'm clear of what you did.
okay,
Thank you.
I can send that out. So are you guys saying that we should remove this topic from tomorrow's CAC agenda entirely, or just I can scale it back and keep it very general?
I think it needs to be scaled back. I think I'm gonna sit in on that meeting as well at the CAC. Because I really want it to be about, we're just beginning the process. And I think I need to, be there in case there's questions that you feel uncomfortable answering, and, I can handle those. And, I think the main thing is to talk to them about the, project, budget, more on the expense side on things that we're going to be doing for the lakes and the streams and those kinds of things. That's what they want. And the, excuse me, the fact that we're going to be maintaining all of our current programs of doing AIS and the shoreline projects and the, what's the other one? The Sunrise River and streams. So we're still gonna continue, excuse me, with those items for now. We don't have to say that we're looking at reducing things, because we're not. We're gathering information right now so that we can make decisions on how to be the most efficient watershed we can be. Okay,
President Anderson, thank you
Yes.
for planning to attend that meeting tomorrow, because I do think we need to get feedback from the CAC. That's the point of having a CAC, to get their input as to ideas. And I agree with scaling back as well. We don't want to bang the alarm or ring the
Right.
bells. It's simply
Right.
to state where we are at and to get some input from them, I think would be helpful as a board
Mhm.
as we move forward. So thank you for being there to answer those questions.
sure. Okay, anything else?
It was I felt very efficient when we discussed schedules last time and set something on the calendar for the next budget workshop. Do you want to look
Yes,
next week
that's true.
calendars
Absolutely.
together?
Yep. Well, I'm gonna wait for, I can make anything work personally, so, next week, so, I'm concerned more for Doug. His work schedule and Chris and,
I'm very limited next week. I'm gonna be at a conference from Sunday through Wednesday, and then the last half of the week, I will be up north with my wife's family. And then
okay,
we're good the week of the 4th. So
okay. So would you mind if we went forward with the meeting, just the next step, not really making any decisions, but understanding all this background that we're going to be gathering?
I'm fine. I mean, there's a chance I could participate.
Good,
Just not certain.
okay. Very
The
good.
only day I have available next week would be Monday.
Okay. Manager Taves,
I can do Monday if it's the same time.
okay,
I think I'm okay, but I'll have to check.
okay. Well, let's pencil it in for, would Monday work for you, Manager Baki?
Yes,
Okay, but not for you, Manager Loth, correct?
Correct. I'm gonna be at a conference, so that
Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead with Monday, 6 to 8. These are all taped, so you can, look at the tape and write your questions down for the next time, Chris. 6 to 8 PM. And what's the date again? Monday, the
23rd.
23rd, okay.
Okay, we'll
And then
plan
our
to get
regular-
that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Our regular meeting is that same week, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
So the
Ellen,
meeting
sorry.
notice, the meeting notice and the agenda will go out this Friday, June 20th. And we'll just have budget workshop on the agenda for Monday, June 23rd. And I will plan to have that memo with the funding information and bonds, and also the workbook of the potential grants we might receive, uncertain grants, posted in that. Well, I could post it in the packet. I can email it out to the board. We can,
Or what, the
whatever you
memos?
prefer. Yeah, the memo and the workbook.
I think just send that to the board at this stage.
Yeah,
Okay.
but the sheets that I need, Emily, could you just print them out for me? Cause I can't print them out at home, they're too small.
Okay, yeah, we could
And I'll
probably do
just pick
that.
them up at the
later
office.
this
Yeah,
week.
thank you.
Okay, I'll send you a note. If anyone else wants printed copies.
Yes, please.
Yes, yes. I like.
When, Emily will print them, but then I will put them in the tray outside of the front
Perfect.
door.
Put a part of our names on them in an envelope.
Okay, yeah.
You know, so that nobody can see it unless they wanna rip it open.
Okay.
Agree with that. All right,
Thank you, everyone.
thank you.
Yep.
Good meeting. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks for all your input. Good night.